class, I'm going to go through with you history paper 2. So I'm going to first take you through the structure of the paper so that you know what to expect. All right. With me here, I have the question paper. Let me first take you through the question paper, then we'll move on to the addendum. So the paper reads History Paper 2, 2022. That was the paper which was written in June. So let's go through the instructions and the information together. The first instruction is that this paper consists of Section A and Section B based on prescribed content framework in the CAPS document. So you find that in Section A, you come across source-based questions. So the first source-based question will be civil resistance. That is from the 1970s to the 1980s, and also the crisis of apartheid in the 1980s. That will be your first question. The second question reads, the coming of democracy to South Africa and coming to terms with the past. That's where you find concepts such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then the third question actually reads the end of the Cold War and a new world order from 1989 up to the present. So basically, it looks at what happened after the Cold War ended and also after the collapse of the USSR. Then Section B is made up of essay questions based on similar topics. For example, question 4, civil resistance, that is from the 1940s to the 1980s, focusing on the country, South Africa. So that's where you would talk about the likes of the Black Consciousness Movement and other civil resistance groups. Question 5 will be the coming of democracy to South Africa and coming to terms with the past. Then the final question will be question 6, which will be the end of the Cold War and a new world order. So having gone through these sections or these questions, we also need to pay attention to the special instruction which is there. Section A consists of 3 source-based questions. Then the source material that is required to answer these questions can be found in the addendum. So when you approach source-based questions, you need to read the addendum first before you attempt any source-based question. Then Section B consists of 3 essay questions. Now, the fourth instruction reads, answer 3 questions as follows. At least one question must be a source-based question, and at least one must be an essay question. Then a third question can either be a source-based question or an essay question. What does this mean? This simply means that you can actually choose 2 source-based questions. Then the third question can be what? An essay question. Or vice versa. You can actually choose 2 essays, then the third question can be a source-based question. Then you're also advised to spend at least 1 hour per question. When you are answering these questions, try to manage your time and try to spend at least 1 hour per question. Then you're also encouraged to apply your knowledge, your skills, and your insight when you're attempting these questions. Then you'll be disadvantaged by merely rewriting the sources as answers, especially when you go to the paragraph writing question. Do not merely rewrite the sources which you are given, but try to paraphrase, try to write in your own words. Then you are also supposed to number the answers accordingly, according to the numbering system that is used in the question paper. Then above all, you are required to write neatly and legibly. So let's go on to the second page. The second page, that is your Section A, which consists of source-based questions. So we are going to start with question 1. How did the United Democratic Front react to P.W. Botha's reforms in the 1980s? Just like what the instructions state, when you're answering this question, read the addendum first. So in the case of 1.1, we are going to refer to source 1A. So let's go to our addendum, then we go through source 1A. All right, source 1A. This source is an extract from a book by S. Du Bois, a historian and academic which focuses on P.W. Botha's reforms that were proposed by the new Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act of 1983. it explains how the cameral system would be introduced, how the tricameral system will be introduced. So there are some keywords which we need to highlight on our source. We need to take note of the following. Our source, where is our source extracted from? So if you go to the first line, you find that our source is actually an extract from a book written by a historian and an academic. That is important when you're asked about the reliability of the what? Of the source. Then we are not going to read the source in detail, but if you have a copy of the source 1A, there you can read it in detail for the sake of time. Then we also need to pay attention to the following. The last words which are written in the source, or you can call it the caption. We need to look at the caption as well. It will actually help us when we are looking at the reliability of the given source. We need to pay attention to the caption. Then after doing that, now let's refer to our first question. Refer to source 1A. What, according to the source, did P.W. Botha's constitutional proposals entail regarding South Africa's parliamentary system? Before we attempt this particular question, we need to pay attention to the demands of the question. What does the question require from us? So in this case, the question reads, what, according to the source, did P.W. Botha's constitutional proposals entail? What was the effect? What did the constitutional proposals entail? So let's highlight or let's underline the term entail. All right. Now, if we refer back to our addendum, let's refer back to our addendum. The next line, P.W. Botha's long-awaited constitutional proposals entailed. So we go there where they start writing entailed, replacing the Westminster system of government with the tricameral parliament. That's where we get our answer for 1.1. P.W. Botha's long-awaited constitutional proposals, they actually required to replace the Westminster system of government with the tricameral parliament. So that is extraction of evidence from source A. In other words, we are directly taking the information which is in source A to answer the question at hand. So that is question 1.1, extraction of evidence from source 1A. Now let's go to the second question. Let's refer back to the question paper. The second question, it reads, define the term referendum in your own words. So we need to highlight the key term there. We need to highlight the key term, which is the term referendum. The term referendum. So when it comes to definition of terms, you need to define terms in your own words. Normally, they will give you a term, then there won't be any definition. So they assume that already you know the meanings of these historical terms. So I'm going to write the meaning of the term referendum there. So a referendum refers to a general vote. It refers to a general vote on a political question. I will explain that. It refers to a general vote on a political question. What does this mean? This simply means that politicians, they might at one point in time come up with proposals. Proposals, for example, the joining of two countries or the changing of the constitution. So when such things happen, usually they consult with the electorate or with the ordinary people. So the ordinary people go to votes, or they actually vote either for something or against something. So they will be required to vote yes or no on a particular political question. So in this case, what was the political question? The introduction of the tricameral system. So there was a referendum whereby the electorate was supposed to vote whether they should accept the tricameral parliament or not. So a referendum is a general vote on a political question. Or you can actually say it's a process of voting for a particular arrangement. It's a process of voting for a particular arrangement. You can call it a general vote on a political question or a process of voting for a particular arrangement. So that is the definition of the term referendum. So 1.12 basically is just defining a term, a historical term. Now let's go to the next question, which is 1.1.3. 1.1.3 reads, explain what is meant by this marked a short-term personal victory for Botha, but the cost was that opposition on both ends of the political spectrum was mobilized in the context of the constitutional proposals in 1983. So here you are required to provide your own understanding or your own of that particular statement, which was actually made by P.W. Botha. So the statement reads, this marked a short-term personal victory for Botha. When something is short-term, it is actually short-lived. It does not go on and on. So this was a short-term achievement in one sense. All right. You can start by saying that the majority of white South Africans, supported the arrangement. The majority of white South Africans, they supported the arrangement. But on the other hand, the black South Africans opposed. So white South Africans supported the arrangement. That's why we are saying that this marked a short-term personal victory. We had white South Africans supporting the arrangements. But let's look at on the side of the black South Africans. The black South Africans actually opposed the arrangement. The black South Africans opposed the arrangement. Black opposed the constitutional arrangements. So what we are saying that it was actually a short-term personal victory, simply because in as much as white South Africans supported the arrangement, the blacks opposed the arrangements. So that's why it is considered to be a short-term victory. Short-term is something which does not go on and on. It's something which is temporary. It was only a temporary victory for Botha. It was a temporary win. It was a temporary success for P.W. Botha. So those are the answers for question 1.1.3. Now let's discuss 1.1.4. Why do you think South Africans were excluded? Why do you think Africans were excluded from the new constitutional arrangements? Why were Africans excluded from the new constitutional arrangements? So one thing which you should bear in mind, South Africa was still under apartheid. So in this case, you can actually provide the response that the arrangements were actually racial. They were racially biased. The arrangements were actually racial in nature, or they were racially biased. That is the first response which you can provide, because there are two responses which you are supposed to provide, then 2 marks for each. So You can start by saying the Constitution was based on racism. The Constitution was racist. It was still racist in nature. That is one reason which you can actually provide. Besides being racist, you can also say that Black South Africans or Africans were viewed as second-class citizens. As second-class citizens. All right, they were not given the same equal treatment as the treatment given to white South Africans. So they were viewed as second-class citizens. So we have two responses then. The Constitution was racist. Africans were viewed as second-class citizens. So that's why they were excluded from the new constitutional arrangements. So those are the two responses which you can actually provide them to respond. Now let's move on to source 1B, which would answer questions 1.2.1. The question reads, quote evidence from the source which suggests that the launch of the UDF was preceded by a lot of preparation. All right, before we move on to the source, I need to highlight some keywords which appear on this particular question. All right, let's highlight the term preceded. The term preceded refers to something which comes before something. To precede, we are talking about something which comes before something. So the question reads, quote evidence from the source which suggests that the launch of the UDF was preceded by a lot of preparation. So we are quoting evidence which shows that there was a lot of preparation which came before the formation of the UDF. Now let's refer to our source. Now we are focusing on source. Source 1B. So source 1B is actually an extract. It's an extract from a speech delivered by Frank Chikane at the launch of the United Democratic Front in Rocklands, Michelle Plain, Cape Town on the 20th of August 1983. It explains the importance of forming a united front against the 1983 apartheid reforms. Now, where do we get our answer? Answer for question 1.2.1, we actually find it in the first paragraph where it reads, comrades, friends, this day today is the culmination of the conclusion of 7 months of work to see the launching of the United Democratic Front. So our answer is found in this phrase, which says, is the culmination of 7 months of work. So it means they actually prepared for the formation of the UDF. They actually prepared for the formation of the UDF, and it actually took them 7 months of work to prepare for the launch of the United Democratic Front. So our answer then would be 7 months of work. So we need to highlight 7 months of work. It took them 7 months of work to see the launch of the United Democratic Front. And this type of question requires you to extract information from the source which you are given. So basically that's extraction of information from the provided source. It actually took them 7 months to prepare for the launch of the UDF. So that is question 1.2.1. It actually took them 7 months. I'll write it below the question. Court evidence. So it took them 7 months. 7 months of preparation of work. This is the evidence which shows that there was a lot of preparation before the launch of the United Democratic Front. Let's move on to 1.2, which reads, identify any two differences. So before we even proceed with the question, we need to highlight the key phrase there. We need to underline. Identify any two differences stated in the source that organizations which came together to form the UDF had to overcome. Remember, the United Democratic Front was made up of people from different backgrounds. So identify two differences stated in the source that organizations which came together to form the UDF had to overcome. So let's refer back to source 1B. All right, if you go back to 1B, second paragraph, let's go back to 1B, second paragraph. Then the second sentence, it reads, there are also differences of class, differences of ideologies, differences of intent, but all of them agree that they reject the reform proposals that are proposed. So let me take you through the sentence again. It reads, and I will be underlining, there are also differences of class, I will underline class, differences of ideology, then let's underline ideology, differences of intent. So how many do we have then? Class differences, ideological differences, and intent differences. So all those actually answer the question 1.2.2, which requires you to identify the differences. So I'm going to write those differences just below the question. All right, the first one is differences of class. When people belong to different social classes. Then differences of intent. Their purposes were actually different. Then differences of ideology. They had different ways of thinking. For example, others had communist ideologies, others had capitalist ideologies, others had nationalist ideologies, and others had Pan-Africanist ideologies. So those are the differences which the people who formed the United Democratic Front tried to overcome when they formed this umbrella organization. So those are the three answers which can answer, answer question 1.2.2. All right, so let's go to 1.2.3, which reads, what is the implication of the statement? I want to call on you, all peace-loving people of South Africa, so that we can destroy the system in the context of the aim of the formation of the UDF. I will repeat the question. What is the implication of the statement? I want to call on you, all peace-loving people of South Africa, so that we can then destroy the system in the context of the aim of the formation of the UDF. In other words, the question is requiring you to state the aim of the formation of the UDF. All right, the first thing which you need to know is that the UDF was primarily formed to oppose the tricameral, to oppose the tricameral parliament. So that is the first. When it was formed to oppose the tricameral parliament. Then in addition to that, it wanted, it called on all South Africans to oppose the constitution. It called on all South Africans to oppose the constitution, so that it called for full democratic reforms. In other words, they were not the current reforms which the tricameral parliament was trying to introduce. They wanted full democratic reforms where Black people could participate fully in the democratic system. Then they were actually calling for inclusive. They wanted an inclusive government which catered for all races, which catered for Africans, Indians, and colors. And colored. So they wanted an inclusive government which catered for Africans, Indians, and colored people. So that's why they made that statement. I want to call on you, all peace-loving people of South Africa, so that you can destroy the system in the context of the aim of the formation of the UDF. They were not comfortable with the tricameral system. So they wanted to oppose it. They called on all South Africans to oppose the constitution and also called for full democratic reforms. They wanted an inclusive government which catered for all Africans, Indians, and colored people. Then 1.2.4, explain why a historian would consider this source reliable when researching the launch of the UDF. Whenever we are looking at the reliability source, we need to pay attention to the following. Where was the source extracted from? Who was the author of that particular source? When was it produced? What information does the source give us? Does it give us dates? Does it give us names of people? Now let's refer to the what? To the addendum. Why would you consider this source to be reliable? All right, the first thing which you need to look at is, where was the source taken from? The source is actually part of a speech. So the fact that it is part of a speech which was delivered by who? By Reverend Frank Chikane on the launch of the United Democratic Front. It shows that the source is reliable. So the source is reliable to a large extent. The source is reliable to a large extent. Why? It was actually an extract, a speech delivered on the day of the launch. On the day of the launch. So the fact that it was delivered on the day of the launch by an eyewitness, it shows that the source is actually reliable. It is a speech which was actually delivered on the of the launch. So in addition to that, you can actually say that it is a first-hand source. It is a first-hand source. Why do we call it a source-hand source? It is actually cut from an eyewitness or a participant who participated in the formation of the UDF. It did not come from someone else, but it actually came from an eyewitness. Then in addition to that, let's look at the dates. The dates 20 August 1983. This is the date of the formation. The fact that it provides dates. The fact that it actually provides the dates of the formation of the UDF, it actually makes the source to be very, very reliable. So we can argue that the source is reliable to a greater extent. Now let's look at the next question, which requires us to go through source 1C. So source 1C below explains the various forms of resistance initiated by the United Democratic Front against apartheid reforms and the subsequent reaction by the state. All right, let's go back to the question paper. The question paper reads, name any two protest actions in the source that the UDF launched against Botha's apartheid reforms. Two protest actions. So we need to highlight the key term there. The question is looking for two protest actions in the source that the UDF launched against Botha's apartheid reforms. What is to protest? What are protest actions? When people protest, they're actually opposing something. So in what ways did they oppose the formation of the tricameral system? Name 2 protest actions. Let's go back to our source. That's where we are going to extract our answer. All right. Let's go to paragraph 1. Second sentence. I'll highlight it. It actually reads, the UDF was involved in the organization of a number of consumer boycotts, stay-aways, and launched 1 million signatures. That's where you find your answer. So the first is consumer boycotts. Then the second one will be stay-aways. Then the last one will be the launching of 1 million signatures. So we have 3 answers there. Consumer boycotts, stay-aways, and launching of 1 million signatures. That's where we get our answer. So we can write our answers here. So the first one, it will actually be consumer boycotts. Consumer boycotts. The second one would be stay-aways. When you stay away from work, that's an example of a protest. Then 1 million signature campaign. All right. So we have 3 things then: consumer boycotts, stay-aways, and also 1 million signature campaigns. Stay-aways, then also 1 million signature campaigns. Those were the methods of protest which were used by the UDF against Botha's apartheid reforms. Now let's go to 1.3.2. Comment on the implication of the slogan, forward to the people's power. Forward to the people's power. So we need to highlight the slogan itself. Forward to the people's power. What is the meaning of that particular slogan? Your own understanding the meaning of that slogan. So it simply means that the UDF represented the majority. That's another way of interpreting this. The UDF represented the majority. Then you can also say that it was a call for full democracy. You can also say that it was a call for full democracy. They were actually calling for full democracy so that people will be given power in themselves without racial discrimination or without racial prejudice. So that is what they were calling for. No wonder why they introduced the slogan, forward to the people's power. Then the next question reads, explain the concept of state of emergency in the context of the general unrest in South Africa in the 1980s. State of emergency, we need to highlight this. State of emergency. So basically that is a definition of terms. That is actually a definition of a historical term. So what does a state of emergency mean? It simply means application of emergency laws. It is when a government applies emergency laws. What are these emergency laws? Laws which do not which do not apply in daily life. This simply means laws which do not apply in daily life. For example, laws which restricting movement movement. Then you can also say that it is a situation where the army, a situation where the police, and the army are given extra powers. Extra powers to deal with unrest. All right. A state of emergency refers to a situation where the police and the army are given extra powers to deal with unrest, especially when there is a situation whereby people are rising against the government. The government can actually introduce a state of emergency. So you can say application of state of emergency laws which do not apply in daily life. For example, laws which restrict movement of ordinary people. That can also define the term state of emergency. All right. Now let's go to source 1D. Let's go to source 1D. We start by looking at source 1D. It appears there on your screen, source 1D. Source 1D, it is actually a poster published by the UDF, the United Democratic Front, in the 1980s. It actually depicts its commitment to resisting oppressive measures of the state. Let's go through the text of the source. Detentions, UDF leaders detained. Bannings, meetings in 22 areas banned. Repression, people shot dead in the townships. Then there is a hand which represents Botha's hands there. We can also see Botha's reforms. We will not be silenced. So it was taken from images of defiance, South African resistance posters of the 1980s. Botha's harassment reforms. Then if we go back to the question, it actually reads, why do you think the UDF published this particular poster? So we would write our answer below. I would write it below. The UDF introduced or why did they use this particular poster? What method were they? What message were they trying to communicate as they published this particular poster? All right. There are so many reasons, or there are several reasons. So the first reason is to show oppressive measures, to show oppressive measures taken by the state, taken by Botha's government, to show the cruel nature of Botha's government. All right. You can also say to portray or to show the suffering of UDF members so as to attract sympathy. They can attract support or sympathy. so that they can support, they can attract support or sympathy. All right, so we have two reasons so far: to show oppressive measures taken by Botha's government, to show suffering of the UDF members so that they can attract support or sympathy. All right, you can also add another one, the third one, to break down Botha's reforms. So it was also an attempt to oppose the reforms which were brought around by P.W. Botha. So you can also even indicate that it was a method of resistance to resist Botha's reforms. So any of these four answers can actually answer question 1.4.1. Why do you think the UDF published this poster? To show the oppressive measures taken by Botha's government, to show suffering of the UDF members so that they can attract support or sympathy, to break down Botha's reforms, to resist Botha's reforms. All those are possible answers for question 1.4.1. Now, let's look at 1.4.2. Identify two oppressive measures in the source that the apartheid regime took against the UDF members. Oppressive measures which the apartheid regime took against the UDF members. Let's go back to the source itself, which is a visual source. A visual source is actually a picture. So if you look at the first word which is written in bold, it actually reads detention. And this actually answers our question. Detentions, the fact that there were detentions. So the first repressive measures or cruel measures which were taken by Botha's government were detentions. Then secondly, on the second word which is written in bold, bannings. Several political leaders were banned. Several organizations were banned. So that is part of repressive measures. Then repression. You need also to circle repression itself. Repression also answers question. Now let's go back to the question. Let's go back to the question so that we can write our answers there. Identify any two oppressive measures in the source that the apartheid regime took against the UDF members. So what you need to write, the first thing is detentions. They actually detained political leaders. All right. The first oppressive measure was detentions. Detentions, bannings. There were several organizations which were banned. Then, in addition to that, you can talk about repression again. Then there's also harassment. Harassment. All right. So the question only requires two oppressive measures, but as I've listed there, you can actually pick from any of those four. So we have detentions, bannings, repression, then there's also harassment. All those are answers for 1.4.2. Now let's move on to the next question, which is 1.5. Refer to sources 1 and 3. It is basically a question which requires you to compare two different sources. So in this case, we are comparing 1C and 1D. Explain how the evidence in source 1D supports the information in 1C regarding the South African government's reaction to UDF. Now let's look at both sources. Let's look at both sources. Let's first look at source 1C. So source 1C, it explains the various forms of resistance initiated by the United Democratic Front. Then if we look at source 1D, it actually depicts the commitment to resisting oppressive measures of the state. So if we look at both sources, they refer to one common thing. They are talking about the repressive nature of Botha's government. So I'm going to write the answer below there, 1.4.2, the suggested answer, 1.1.4.2. 1.4. Both sources refer to the oppressive nature of Botha's reforms. Both sources refer to the oppressive nature of Botha's reforms. They agree. Both sources agree both sources agree that Botha's reforms were oppressive. Reforms were oppressive. So if you look at both sources, they actually agree that Botha's reforms were oppressive. Then in addition to that, they also, both sources agree to the fact that leaders of the UDF were harassed. Both sources agree to the fact that leaders of the UDF were actually harassed. So we have managed to compare these two sources, and we found two similarities. Both sources refer to the oppressive nature of Botha's reforms. Then also, both sources agree that Botha's reforms were oppressive. Then, in addition to that, you can also say that both sources agree to the fact that leaders of the UDF were continuously harassed. So that is 1.4.2. 1.4.6, it actually says, using them, information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of 8 lines or about 8 words explaining how the United Democratic Front reacted to P.W. Botha's reforms. I need to highlight the key issues so that we avoid some of them problems which candidates face when they are attempting this particular question. So the first thing we need to underline is using information in the relevant sources. So we are going to use information from the source. Then in addition to that, you are going to add your own knowledge that actually refers to information which was not included in the source, but would be relevant to the question. Then the second thing which I would want to draw your attention to is you must write your answer in paragraphic format. Your answer should actually be in paragraph format. Then those paragraphs should be about 8 lines, which constitutes about 80 words, explaining how the UDF reacted to Botha's reforms. So the first thing is that you must read all the sources. Then from the sources, you take out information which explains how the UDF reacted to P.W. Botha's reforms in the 1980s. So these sources also try as much as possible to write them in your own words. the information or the points which you would extract from the sources, you must try to write them in your own words. All right. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to list some of the points which you can actually include, ways in which the UDF tried to oppose Botha's reforms. So this, for the sake of space, I would actually use this space below here for question 1.6. I'll just write the questions, the points in short. 1.6. So some of the points which you can include is that UDF rejected Botha's reforms. I'm only going to write brief notes. The first thing is that they opposed Botha's reforms. The UDF organized boycotts. Then you can also indicate that they organized stay-aways as stated in source B. They organized stay-aways. The UDF used posters. Like the one in source 1D. Used posters to mobilize people. It actually used posters to mobilize people. You can also indicate that the UDF united people of different ideologies. It actually united people of different ideologies. It actually united people who had different ideologies. It united people of different ideologies and brought them together to fight for one thing. And brought them together. You find that when you're writing your paragraph, there are several points which you can take from the different sources which have been provided. So make sure that you take points from all the sources. Then in addition to the information which you would have taken from the different sources, also your own additional information. You need to add your own additional information. And always remember to write everything in paragraph format. Remember, the length or the word limit of your paragraph is 80 words. It's actually 80 words. So we have a challenge that most learners leave this question unanswered. But you find that it's a question which is easily managed. Take points from all the 4 sources which you have been given. Then also add your own information to those particular points. Then create a fluent paragraph of not more than 80 words. So question 1.6 brings us to the end of the first question. So now we'll be moving on. To question number 2. So since it is a source-based question, we're also going. All right. Now let's go through the second question, which reads: how did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission (TRC) deal with the murder of PEPCO 3? Now we are going to study sources 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D, and then you answer the questions that follow. So let me take you through the addendum. Just like I said earlier on, whenever you source-based questions, you must read the addendum first. And as you read the addendum first, you must make sure that for each question, refer to a particular source. So in this case, we are only going to start with source 2A. The question reads, how did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission deal with the murder of Pepco 3? So the caption above reads, the source below highlights the formation and objectives of the Port Elizabeth Black Civic Organization, which is abbreviated as PEPCO, in October 1979, and explains how its leadership was abducted by the security police in 1985. Other details of the source, they appear there. The PEPCO, the date of the formation is listed there. Then the main objective is also listed there. Then its focus is also listed in paragraph 1. Then in addition to that, they also mention